Alright, so welcome back. Like it is still history dating back to time immemorial right on this channel, and we're still on the making of the Nigerian Fourth Republic, and the subtopic is the British legacy. And the fact that Lugard was pleased with how a system was working in the north, he sought after 1914 to extend it to the south, but then the model didn't fit. The model of the indirect rule, that system of government didn't fit in the south, nor did it fit in the area of the north, later called the Middle Belt. Patterns of rules in the south were quite different, though government was religiously based as it was in north. There was a far wider range of participation, even in the centralized pre-British states, and in some cases, checks and balances effectively hampered by arbitrary exercise of power. And thus, with missionary penetration of the South underway since the 1840s, some Western educated Africans actively opposed a continuing British presence without African participation. In the coastal towns of Lagos and Calabar, they sought a political role. Then the British attempt to impose the apparently tidy administrative system of the North on the South brought varied reactions, most of them which were hostile. In trying to remote tradition, colonial administrators ran into resistance from those who took the Western world at its word that the goal should be self-government along Western lines. What did that mean? But African leadership, educated in West traditions as well as in their own? That's a question begging for an answer. Therefore, few decisions made in the early decades of British rule in Nigeria had major consequences for the country's future. Most critical decision undoubtedly was Lugard's insistence that the country be ruled as two parts, not four or more, as others proposed. The North-South division has continued to plague Nigeria's politics, at least psychologically, and ever since, which is remains still today. And the educational policy only reinforced the split. Nigerians from the South, who had far greater access to Western education, assumed that they thereby had superior rights to rule. Those from the North by no means granting such. The South think they are the most educated. Of course, the South is the most educated region in Nigeria, and they think they are the best. They had the best chances as ruling and controlling the country. But the North, being opportune by being loved by the British and the fact that they had a number, they vehemently refused. And then those from the north by no means granted such a right, nonetheless felt that they will be outclassed in the competition for position of power and influence in a modern Nigeria. And then during the 90s and especially in the 1920s and especially in the 1930s, the issue of political change was largely moot. There was no movement on that front apart from the important precedent in the South in 1922 of allowing a few Africans to be elected by urban constitution to a legislative council that acted in an advisory capacity. None of them seriously thought that an independent Nigeria was only a few decades away. With the Great Depression, the world's economic troubles impinged everywhere, and in Nigeria, the stress on producing cash crops for exports redoubled. Palm oil and kernels from the east, cocoa from the west, cotton and groundnut from the north. Tin and little coal were the only minerals, and the only improvement in the infrastructure was development of the railways, which began soon after the 1900s and financed from Nigerian taxes. The purpose was to carry the primary produce to the coastal ports and to facilitate moving British goods to the country's major interior markets. The roads that were built were connected with the railways, and then World War II brought to Nigeria, as to most of Europe's colonies, a new political drive. Since the war was fought in the name of freedom, Africans and others who contributed to an Allied victory felt that self-determination should be their reward. Colonial powers did not see it immediately, even in the early 1950s. Many Europeans with colonial experience talked of independence as still decades away without knowing that it is just really close by. The idea of self-government, however, was singularly British, no doubt with subsequent precedents in mind. Britain considered the minuscule representation of Nigerians in the Legislative Council in 1922 important because it became the legislative process. By 1914, the then governor, Sir Otto Richard, set out proposals for new constitution. He hoped, as he said, to promote the unity of Nigeria, to provide adequately within that desire for the diverse elements which make up the country, and to secure greater participation by Africans in the discussion of their own affairs. He succeeded in the last of these goals, though still allowing only indirect elections. We'll be talking about the rest of the British legacy in the next coming videos. Until then,